Great radio, as you'll hear for this whole hour. It's going to be punchy ready. But this bloke, his name's Harold the H. P. Cock-a-doodle-doo. He is the historian, and this is a great story. He's going to tell us back in the 1850s in Ipswich, you used to get prison time for chucking a sickie, which is so Australian, chucking a sickie. Only Australians say that. G'day there, Harold the H. Peacock.
Yeah, good morning, Danny. Now, you're not sick. You are on fire today. And this story is a good one for you from 175 years ago.
Take it away. I won't disturb you. Just get into it, Harold.
Yeah, okay. Look, for this story, I'll tell you about the Ipswich convict, Daniel Sullivan. Now, Sullivan was one of 297 convicts transported on the ship Bangalore who arrived in Moreton Bay on the 30th of April 1850. Now, Sullivan had been sentenced to 10 years for pickpocketing in London and came direct to Moreton Bay as an exile after convict transportation had actually officially ended.
So you're telling me that back those days you pickpocketed, you get sent off to this most beautiful island there, idiots, those pommies.
Yeah, you get rewarded back then. That's why the Poms hate it now. But look, with Sullivan, look, the colony needed cheap convict labour, and so even though transportation had finished, the British government still transported more convicts direct to Moreton Bay on the basis that they received their ticket of leave as soon as they arrived. That's how they got around the law. And so one of these exiles was a man by the name of John Hutton, who, after he arrived, was convicted of 2 charges of indecent assault, with the evidence being so bad that it was considered totally unfit for publication even back then. Now, before Hutton finished his sentence, he volunteered to be Moreton Bay's and therefore Queensland's first ever public executioner.
What was his name?
His name was John Hutton. He legally executed hundreds in Queensland. Now, one of the military pensioner guards also on the Bangalore with Sullivan was the eccentric Michael Turley. Now, Turley later rode through Ipswich with his long white hair flowing in the wind on his way to murdering the station manager at, not the radio station, by the way, at Mitchell Downs. Now, at 70 years old, he became the oldest person ever sentenced to death in Australia, then the oldest to have his death sentence commuted. And at 80 years of age, he was the oldest man ever murdered in prison.
Wow.
But back to Daniel Sullivan, the Ipswich convict. Even after arriving in 1850 and getting his ticket of leave to stay in Ipswich, he could not stay on the straight and narrow. In 1851, he lost his ticket of leave for committing a violent assault here. In 1852, he was illegally at large after absconding from the survey road party of Captain Samuel Perry of the Royal Navy. Now, Captain Perry had been the private secretary of colonial aide-de-camp and the governor of Dominica in the West Indies. In New South Wales, he was for a time the acting governor of the colony and was the deputy surveyor general. In fact, he was responsible for surveying much of Sydney as well as Queensland. And while he was surveying Ipswich was when Sullivan absconded. Now, in 1853, Sullivan again had his ticket of leave cancelled for illegally leaving the district. In 1857, he got his ticket of leave back to stay in Ipswich. In 1858, he lost it again for illegally taking off. In 1863, while living in the centre of Ipswich, Sullivan was implicated in the theft, pickpocketing of 2 gold watches. But it's what he did in 1850, just weeks after arriving, that's of particular interest. That's when Sullivan appeared in court before Ipswich's first magistrate, Dr. William Dorsey, who was one of the very first free settlers in Queensland. Now, this same year, 1850, Dorsey was charged in his own court of stealing 2 ducks, which, that resulted in the greatest human stack in Ipswich history. That's another story that I've told you about. Now, appearing before Dr. Dorsey in this instance, the convict Sullivan was facing charges brought against him by his assigned master, Mr. John Harris, who was the Ipswich bricklayer. Now, Harris's family was living at Basin Pocket, while here in town, Harris and his work crew, including Sullivan, were building the original part of the North Australian Hotel. Now, you might remember that hotel was demolished in the 1980s, and today the site of 1 Nicholas Street is part of the Ipswich City Mall. But back in 1850, Sullivan complained of feeling sick, and so walked off the job. He just went home. He returned, fueled up with false bravado. You know, you can imagine what caused that. Now, after being mildly cascaded, Sullivan responded by threatening to kill sundry members of the Harris family.
Jeez.
Now, to get started, he hit a visitor with everything he had. A constable was called, and that's how Sullivan ended up in court in front of Dr. Dorsey, charged with falsely calling in sick. And the good doctor, as punishment for the sick he pulled in 1850, sentenced Sullivan to 7 days solitary confinement in the Ipswich cells. And so that's what you got for chucking a sickie 175 years ago, Danny. 7 days solitary. And I'm not sure what the punishment is today. Do you know?
No, I don't. Well, they permanent sickies because they're stinking working from stinking home. That's a sickie in my opinion. Daniel Sullivan and the executor, the first of Queensland, is John Hutton, and the first magistrate was Dr. Dorsey.
That's it, Dr. Dorsey.
Mate,
and his ducks.
And his ducks, mate. You built that story to a crescendo that nearly blew up Ipswich Central, and we appreciate it.
7 days solitary confinement, that's a crescendo. You don't want to get sick when you had to get locked away in solitary in the
Yeah, there'd be a lot locked up these days for sickies. But, folks, that was Harold the H. Peacock with an Ipswich history. How do we see this story in others?
Yeah, you can find History Out there on Facebook, Instagram, X and YouTube. You should follow History Out there. You get the story sent to you, or go online to historyouthere.com. There's almost 5 years of stories, these short stories about Ipswich, Danny, that's on there for you.
There he is. Coming up is Jane Keogh talking about the timber pleasure cruises in the Moreton Bay, the Miramar and the Cooper, which used to go across to Bribie. You are tuned to West Bremer Radio. It's 8:20 at 25 degrees outside, and we're making you happy right here.
Was that it?
Yeah, well, I should have went out on West Bremer Radio.
That's the one I was waiting for.
On West Bremer Radio.